with you think people are hard to read. You believe their thoughts are hidden, locked away behind polite smiles and well-chosen words. But the truth is, people are never really hiding. Every movement, every pause, careless phrase is a confession. Most just don't know how to listen. What if I told you that the masks people wear are thinner than you think? And once you see through them, you can't unsee them, already notice more than you think. You might not always recognize it, but your mind is constantly picking up signals. A glance, a hesitation, the way someone laughs too loudly or cuts a story short. These are clues, fragments of the truth slipping through the mask. Most people dismiss these details, but once you learn how to read them, you'll realize they tell you more about a person than their words ever could. Words are practiced, rehearsed, safe. But the small cracks, unguarded moments, those are where the real story lives. And that's exactly what we're exploring here. 18 truths about people that Nietzsche's philosophy can help us uncover. This isn't a quick list of tricks or a set of clever hacks. It's not about spotting lies in a poker game or catching someone in an argument. What we're talking about goes much deeper than that. These truths are about understanding human nature at its roots, about learning why people act the way they do, seeing past the surface, so you can finally recognize the forces driving them. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It will change the way you move through the world. Think about how you were raised. From childhood, you were told to listen to people's words, to take what they said as proof of what they felt. Nietzsche didn't trust language the way society teaches us to. He saw it as a shield, a way people protect themselves rather than reveal themselves. We're taught to confuse the mask with the person, when in reality, the mask is only armor. The smiling, agreeable colleague might not be as kind-hearted as you assume. Sometimes that politeness is fear of rejection disguised as warmth. The bold, commanding leader who seems unshakable might actually be terrified of being exposed as weak. The point isn't that people are fake. The point is that people are scared. They create versions of themselves designed to survive. And the longer you look, the more you realize the surface never matches the depth. Nietzsche once wrote that every profound spirit needs a mask. Mean that as an insult. He meant it as a warning. Don't confuse what someone shows you with who they are. Behind every carefully crafted exterior, there's a person who has been shaped by fear, by shame, by the need to be accepted. If you look closely enough, you can see where the cracks begin to show. The first truth is simple: everyone wears a mask. No one moves through society completely exposed. We all create personas that make us feel safe, that protect us from rejection or judgment. Those masks are never perfect. They slip, and when they slip, tension appears. The shift in tone, the forced laugh would pause. These are the openings. If you pay attention, you'll see the real person peek through. The second truth builds on this. What people criticize most in others is often what they're trying to hide in themselves. Projection is one of the sharpest tools of human behavior. Someone who constantly complains about arrogance is often insecure about their own worth. Someone who relentlessly calls out dishonesty might be avoiding a truth they can't bear to face. We don't hate others randomly. We hate the reflections of our own hidden flaws. And so, when you want to understand someone, don't just notice what they admire, watch what they attack and why. The third truth is that silence reveals more than speech. Nietzsche didn't believe truth came from words. He saw language as something the herd uses to cover up reality. When someone dodges a question, when they pause too long before answering, when they respond with short, rehearsed phrases to deep questions, their silence is telling you more than any elaborate explanation could. Silence is fear exposing itself. Silence is the map to the places they don't want you to go. The fourth truth is that loud virtue often disguises vanity. Be cautious around the person who loudly declares their purity, the one who is always correcting, always preaching, always trying to appear morally superior. Nietzsche saw this as the will to power wearing the mask of morality. Real goodness is quiet. Real integrity doesn't need applause. When someone can't stop broadcasting their virtue, it usually means there's something hidden behind the performance. The fifth truth is one that changes the way you hear people forever. They don't lie to you first, they lie to themselves. When someone says, "I'm fine, I'm over it, I don't care," it's not an attempt to deceive you, a script they've been telling themselves so many times that they've begun to believe it. Self-deception isn't evil. It's survival, a way of functioning in a painful world. So when you notice that someone's story doesn't add up, don't assume they're trying to trick you. Realize they've been tricking themselves far longer, and that is what allows you to read them, because the inconsistencies are confessions. The sixth truth is one Nietzsche returned to. Often superiority is usually hiding inferiority. The person who brags endlessly about accomplishments, who casually cuts others down, who constantly needs to prove they're important, is often terrified of being overlooked. True confidence doesn't compete. It doesn't demand acknowledgement. It simply is. When you encounter someone who can't stop reminding you of their power, look deeper. Behind the throne, there's usually a frightened child wearing a crown. When you put these truths together, something begins to shift. You stop reacting to the surface. You begin seeing through the mask. And you realize that reading people isn't about judgment. It's about understanding. That person who interrupts constantly might not be arrogant. They might simply be terrified of being forgotten. That friend who posts endlessly about their happiness might not be joyful. They might be crying out for help. The neighbor who avoids eye contact while saying, "I'm fine," is telling you to listen to their body, not their sentence. Once you see people in this light, you become less likely to hate them. And that's the secret. Nietzsche didn't want you to learn these truths so you could control people. He wanted you to stop being fooled by masks and start connecting to the real, hidden person underneath. But masks only hold for so long. The moment they're threatened, the truth leaks out. Nietzsche believed the self isn't stable. It's a performance stitched together from old fears and roles. When those performances are pushed too far, they reveal the cracks. That's where the second layer of truths begins to show. Most human actions are driven by fear. Why does someone over-explain? Why do they dominate conversations? Why do they suddenly disappear when things get too close? The answer is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, fear of failure, abandonment. Rarely do people act out of pure desire. More often they act to avoid losing something: status, love, safety, worth. So if you want to read someone, stop asking what they want. Start asking what they're afraid of losing. That's where the truth hides. Criticism is a mirror. When someone constantly tears others down, when their conversations are full of mockery, judgment, or ridicule, you can almost always trace it back to something they're denying in themselves. The man who mocks vulnerability may be terrified of his own feelings. The woman who attacks others' appearance may be fighting a silent war with her reflection. Judgments are confessions, just pointed in the wrong direction. They sound like attacks on others, but they're really maps to the speaker's own pain. False confidence is another mask worth paying attention to. You've met people who seem overly composed, unshakably certain, always in control. But if you watch long enough, you'll see the tension in their jaw, the way they over-prepare, the way they become defensive when challenged. Confidence isn't peace. It's guilt trying to hide. It might be regret. It might be shame. It might be a past self they're trying to erase. Nietzsche noticed this most in leaders and teachers, people who perform certainty, because the thought of being seen for who they really are terrifies them. So when someone seems impossibly confident, don't be intimidated. Be curious about what they're trying to cover. Exaggeration gives away doubt. Someone who constantly declares, "I don't care what anyone thinks," usually cares more than anyone. The person who insists, "I'm always happy," often isn't. The louder and more absolute the claim, the less likely it is to be true. Exaggeration is the ego trying to drown out insecurity. Nietzsche believed that extremes in any direction are signs of imbalance. So the next time you hear someone using words like always, never, everyone, don't take the words at face value. Ask yourself what insecurity they're trying to silence. And then there's control, crave it. In their routines, in their work, in their relationships. When someone takes that craving too far. When they micromanage every detail, when they can't handle change, when they dominate others to keep order. It's usually not strength. It's fear of collapse. Nietzsche saw this clearly. The stricter the outer shell, the more fragile the inner self. Those who can't tolerate uncertainty on the outside are often terrified of the chaos inside. Finally, we arrive at performance. This one hits hardest in the world we live in now. The louder the performance, the emptier the core. Look at social media, the endless posing, the curated identities, the constant need to be seen. Nietzsche didn't see this as strength. He saw it as desperation. All when someone builds a life around being watched, it's because they don't believe they'll be loved without the show. Person who truly knows themselves doesn't need applause. They already feel whole. And so when you see someone performing endlessly, don't mistake it for power. Recognize it for what it is, a whisper of need. By the time you notice all of these patterns, something inside you changes. You walk into a room and the masks start to reveal themselves. The interruptions don't feel like arrogance anymore. The bragging sounds more like a wound than an insult. Reading minds. You're reading the slips, the cracks, the places where fear leaks out. And that's what Nietzsche gave us. Not just ideas, but a flashlight. Once you shine it on people, you can't unsee what it reveals. The first half of this journey peeled away the outer layer, the performance people put on for the world. But once you begin to see beyond the rehearsed words and careful gestures, something even more revealing comes into view. You start noticing how the mask slips when someone feels cornered, when their pride is threatened, when their comfort is shaken. These are the cracks where the truth leaks through, and in many ways, they're more honest than anything someone will ever confess directly. Fear is the great puppeteer behind human behavior. At the surface it might look like confidence, aggression, or indifference. Trace the thread back far enough, it almost always leads to fear. Think about the friend who dominates every conversation, never letting anyone else finish a sentence. On the surface, you might label them arrogant, but underneath, their need to control the discussion often comes from a fear of being invisible. If they stop talking, if the spotlight shifts, worry they'll disappear completely. Criticism works the same way. People believe they're pointing out flaws in others, but what they're really doing is holding up a mirror to themselves. That person who constantly mocks others for being weak is usually wrestling with their own sense of weakness. The coworker who can't stop accusing others of being dishonest often has a troubled relationship with their own truth. Once you recognize this, criticism stops wounding you in the same way. You start to see it less as an attack and more as an unintentional confession. Confidence, too, can be misleading. Some people carry themselves with remarkable calm, as though nothing could ever disturb them. They smile at stress, glide through conflict, and appear untouched by the world's chaos. But often, this appearance of calm is not the absence of turmoil. It is the cover for it. Their polished exterior is stitched over a deep well of regret, or a guilt they've buried so far down that the only way to survive is to pretend it doesn't exist. You gave her your all. You'll notice it in the way they avoid certain topics, or how their calm shatters the moment their carefully hidden shame is touched. Exaggeration is another form of hiding. The louder someone insists that they don't care, the more they probably do. The more someone declares that they're fine, the less fine they usually are. This is not cynicism. It's pattern recognition. People rarely announce what is true for them without prompting. They announce what they're trying to convince themselves of. In fact, the more energy they put into the announcement, the less solid the truth behind it. Control tells a similar story. There are people who demand order in every space they enter. Their desks are immaculate, their routines unshakable, plans always laid out days in advance. At first glance, you might admire their discipline. But often, control is not a mark of strength. It's a desperate attempt to hold together an inner world that feels chaotic. Everything around them falls neatly into place. Perhaps the storm inside will quiet down. But it rarely does. The external order becomes a fragile wall holding back the flood. And then there is performance, the endless need to be seen. Some people crave an audience for every step they take, every thought they form, every achievement they reach. They can't just live display. On the surface, it looks like pride or vanity, but deeper down, it is emptiness speaking. Without validation, without applause, like nothing. Their hunger to be seen is less about joy and more about survival. They need the reflection in someone else's eyes to prove they exist. When you see these patterns, life changes. Conversations stop being surface exchanges and start feeling like X-rays. Rooms begin to carry a different energy, because you're no longer just hearing words. You're witnessing wounds trying to disguise themselves. It doesn't make you a mind reader, but it makes human behavior transparent in ways that can be both enlightening and heavy. Because the more you see, the harder it is to ignore. But Nietzsche didn't leave the lesson there. He went deeper. He suggested that behind every mask and every performance lies something older. Childhood scripts, unhealed pain, moments of shame or neglect. These are the roots of adult behavior. People believe they've outgrown their past, But in truth, the past often dictates every move they make. Take beliefs, for example. We like to think our logic and opinions are shaped by reason, by thoughtful analysis. But if you look closely, see that most beliefs are built on pain. A person who distrusts love isn't simply being rational. They've been abandoned before. Someone who clings fiercely to independence may not be naturally self-reliant. They were forced to fend for themselves too young. What we call logic is often a castle built on old wounds. Arguments people present are less about truth and more about protecting themselves from experiencing that pain. True character, Nietzsche suggested, doesn't reveal itself when someone is strong. It reveals itself in how they treat weakness. Watch how a person speaks to the waiter, how they respond to a struggling colleague, how they behave when they have nothing to gain from kindness. Strength often masks itself in performance, but compassion, or the lack of it, cannot be faked for long. Attention-seeking is another wound in disguise. The loudest person in the room isn't always arrogant. Sometimes they are terrified of being forgotten. Every story they tell, every joke they crack, every exaggerated gesture is a plea. The volume of their personality is a shield against the fear of silence. Envy works the same way. On the surface, appears as insult, dismissal, or even mockery. But if you look deeper, envy is rarely about dislike. It's about longing. When someone tears down the ambitious, the successful, or the beautiful, it's not usually because they truly despise them. It's because those qualities stir something painful inside. The reminder of what they wish they could be, but believe they are not. And then there's the cycle of childhood roles repeating themselves. Adult who constantly gives was once the child who felt they had to earn love. Adult who withdraws emotionally was once the child who learned that showing feelings only led to punishment. We grow older. Unless those patterns are faced, we don't outgrow them, we reenact them. Every relationship becomes a stage where the old wound tries, and again, to find resolution. Patterns themselves are confessions. A person who ghosts others is silently revealing their own fear of confrontation or their own history of abandonment. Someone who works obsessively is confessing that their worth feels conditional, tied to productivity. The flirt who can't commit is confessing a fear of intimacy, not a love of variety. These behaviors aren't quirks or random choices. They're coded messages, telling the story of pain that hasn't yet found its voice. When you begin to see this, something shifts in you. The judgments you once held soften. The anger you felt at others' arrogance or coldness begins to dissolve into understanding. You realize that behind every mask is a wound, behind every boast is fear, and behind every harsh word is a confession of pain. This changes not only how you view others, but how you view yourself. Because the same rules apply inward. Your own masks, your own performances, your own patterns, they're not random either. They're the same signals, written in your behavior, back to your own story. To see this in yourself can be unsettling, but it can also be liberating. The moment you stop hiding from your own patterns, you begin to reclaim the parts of you that were lost long ago. That is the quiet revelation Nietzsche offers to read others, is to read yourself. The more clearly you see the masks and wounds of those around you, the more clearly you understand the masks and wounds you've been carrying all along. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. Once the veil has been lifted, you can't return to blindness. You've learned to see the invisible, and with that sight comes choice. You can continue the cycle, judging, hiding, performing, or you can step into something deeper. You can choose compassion for others and for yourself. And in that choice, you find something rare in this world, real connection, stripped of performance, grounded in truth.